Good afternoon or good morning to everyone, depending on what part of the planet you are in. The Biochemical Society and Portland Press are pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, which is part of our Biochemistry Focus webinar series and Global Mitochondrial Disease Awareness Week as well. Topics in the series have included different research areas in the molecular biosciences, as well as practical sessions to support early career development. Each webinar will give people the opportunity to ask questions via text, and we welcome suggestions for future topics and speakers to feature in our webinar series. So please check the website in more details, and I'll mention that at the end as well. This event today aims to showcase the creation of an international network of excellence in mitochondrial research, bringing together experts in different aspects of mitochondrial discovery research, but also generating an interdisciplinary collective of international scientists, local social scientists, bioethicists, patient groups, clinical groups, and design researchers that seek to contribute to the understanding and caring for mitochondrial diseases and dysfunctions using innovative approaches. The event builds on previous activities, including during Mitochondrial Disease Awareness Week last year in 2020, several crossover workshops on interdisciplinary approaches between scientists, social scientists, and designers, and activities of the Mitochondrial Innovation Initiative, Mito2I. Today's webinar will be composed of two different parts. So the first part, mitochondrial relevance, will cover approximately the first 40 minutes of the session and consists of 4 brief presentations covering the work that this interdisciplinary group has been developing on mitochondrial relevance campaigns, including the activities of the crossover project that I mentioned and the Mitochondria Collective network. The second part, Global Mitochondrial Collective, will be held as an open discussion and will explore the work of the collective more in depth, including how patient groups can be involved. My name is Pedro Ferreira. I'm a neuroscientist and a public engagement practitioner by training, and I'm the Education and Public Engagement Manager at the Biochemical Society. So before I hand over to our first speaker and do a bit of intro, I'd like to mention that questions will be asked at the end of the webinar, so in the second session and the second part of the session. But please feel free to ask questions during the talk. So if you have any questions, you can type them in the question box shown in the page exactly, yeah, exactly, just stating who your question is for, or you can just ask a general question and then I'll see best, I'll ask it to the panel or point it to someone, and we'll try to answer as many questions at the end as we can. So the first speakers for the first part of today's sessions are Professor Kostas Tokatridis, Professor Anna Andreasa, Dr. Michael Pierre-Johnson, and Sonia Rivasi. And I apologize if I mispronounce or eventually will mispronounce any names. So just to briefly introduce the 4 speakers before I hand the mic over to them. So Professor Kostas Tokatridis is the Cathcart's Chair of Biochemistry and head of the Mitochondrial Biology Lab at the University of Glasgow. The professor is also, amongst other honors, he's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Biology and the Royal Society of Chemistry. Professor Anna Andreasa is the Canada Research Chair in Molecular Pharmacology of Mood Disorders and the Thomas C. Zakos Chair in Mitochondrial Research, as well as professor in the departments of Pharmacology and Psychiatry at the University of Toronto, and as well as Scientific Director of the Mitochondrial Innovation Initiative. Dr. Michael Pierre-Johnson, our third speaker for this first part, is an Arts and Humanities Research Council Innovation Leadership Fellow at the Innovation School of the Glasgow School of Art. And the fourth speaker will also be facilitating the second part of the session today, is Sonia Rivasi, who is the Associate Director of Strategy and Partnerships for the Mitochondrial Innovation Initiative, or Mito2I, at the University of Toronto. So you see we have a very star-studded panel for today, and it's going to be an amazing session. So I'm going to pass over to Kostas for the first talk.
Just to start off this session, I would like to introduce our experience with Mitochondria and Us activity, which started about 2 years ago. And just to set the screen, we're all here because we're interested in mitochondria, either as researchers or social scientists or designers. So mitochondria are important for the cell physiology and also for cell death. And our research, which is quite interdisciplinary, is to understand how these powerhouses work. And of course, mitochondria are not just involved in energy production, but also in several other activities in the cell. They control life, but also cell death. So the biogenesis of mitochondria is critical to their function. It requires the coordination of two genomes, the nuclear and the mitochondrial genome. But mitochondrial dysfunction underpins not only the primary mitochondrial diseases, but also very common human diseases like cancer, neurodegeneration. And I think we're going to speak about that and how important it is to realize that mitochondria have an absolutely critical function in all of these broad, very broad human diseases. Primary mitochondrial diseases are devastating and incurable. We will hear about the experiences of people from patient groups in the second part of the webinar. In terms of the research, I'm an academic. Some of the other speakers are academics as well. We're very excited about this field because it's a highly interdisciplinary field. And the work on mitochondria has evolved to be very, very international right from the beginning. And it is very exciting because we're making very good progress combining all these different disciplines. So it is an area that is advancing at very rapid pace. And that was actually the focus of the first activity, the webinar that we organized last year, to actually highlight this interdisciplinary approach, international approach, and also the efforts we're making in connecting with patient groups, designers, and artists to raise awareness of mitochondrial dysfunction in general. So they are essential organelles, but they're very complex to study. This is why the sort of collaborative approaches are very important for mitochondria, because we need to handle several mutations. More than 300 genes are involved in mitochondrial diseases. We need to handle different conditions like cancer, heart disease, even the aging process, and also apoptosis. And some of the key themes in mitochondrial research over decades have been how mitochondria are made, but also how mitochondria are turned over in situations where they dysfunction. Then the cell needs to get rid of them so that it can proliferate more effectively. How they function, how do they underpin physiology? And what does mitochondrial damage mean in terms of common diseases, but also in terms of primary mitochondrial disease? So the first activity that we organized trying to bring together different disciplines was about a year ago for, again, in the context of the Mitochondrial Awareness Week, where we organized a webinar that was supported by the Biochemical Society, the Glasgow School of Art, our University of Glasgow, and the Royal Society of Edinburgh, where we had a good number of participants, more than 350, really global participation, and allowed us to draw some conclusions in terms of what are the common activities that we can actually initiate to stress this global approach in awareness of mitochondria, but also in realizing what are the necessary important questions that we need to focus on. So just as a showcase of what we tried to do about a year ago, we brought people together from different scientific disciplines. As I said, mitochondria is interdisciplinary at its core. It draws from chemistry, biology, medicine, physics, data science. And in that webinar, we also wanted to address the perspectives of the early career researchers, activities like the Mito Women, so female researchers involved in mitochondrial research. And in the second part of that webinar, we already addressed some questions, bringing in bioethicists, social scientists, and patient groups. So these were the participants in the scientific session, how to debunk mitochondria, that really brought their perspective, and I will go through the individual topics. Can you see them?
Perfect. We can see them now. Yes.
Well, I have to go through.
Perfect. Thank
this.
you.
Okay, so this is here the sort of efforts in terms of highlighting the interdisciplinarity of mitochondrial research. So we were focusing on approaches from medicine with Bob Lightowlers from Newcastle, biology from Gloria Brea Calvo from Spain, chemistry from Richard Hartley, University of Glasgow, physics from the Max Planck Institute in Göttingen, from Stefan Jacobs, data science, and physiology. The early career perspective was also highlighted in that meeting. But in the second part, we had the impact in society. So patient charities, for example, the Lilly Foundation, the International Mitochondrial Patient Charities, the Mito Women Initiative, sociology experts, bioethicists, and designers. So what really was the take-home message from that first initiative, where we brought all these different disciplines together, was that there are a few fundamental principles that we can sort of embed in our future activities, and that is interdisciplinarity, international approach, but also an effort to get beyond the siloed approach in studying a particular disease and go to a more mitochondrial-centric approach that underpins, in a kind of a disease agnostic way, several other diseases. So focus on the fundamental mechanisms that will have broad relevance for different types of diseases. In order to understand the mitochondria inner workings and the mechanistic aspects of this really exciting and intriguing organelle. So in terms of the activities at the local level, so that prompted us to actually get together and partner up with several of the universities in Scotland to establish a mitochondrial network in Scotland, and that brings together these different universities, some of the most, the largest universities in Scotland: Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, St Andrews, Strathclyde, and also a partner organization, which is the Scottish University Life Sciences Alliance, which facilitates and funds life science research in Scotland. And going from the national level to the international level and a more global level, what we would like to do today is discuss about the Mitochondria Collective, which is an idea that came about by connecting with the MitoTI initiative in Canada and our colleagues at the Glasgow School of Art, that bring together expertise not just from mitochondrial research, but also from social scientists and designers' perspective. So I will stop there. I will stop sharing my screen now and pass it on to Anna for the next talk.
Thank you very much, Pedro, for the Biochemical Society to help us to bring together the Mitochondria Collective today to be here. Cost is a pleasure being working with you and Michael and everyone at the University of Glasgow to bring this story together. This week is Mitochondria Awareness Week, and we are very proud in the Mitochondria Innovation Initiative to bring to you in our Instagram and Twitter every day a little bit of the voices of why it's so important to have this collective and bring us together. So please go on in our website and in our Twitter and Instagram and check it out. By the end of the week, you will have the full story coming together. Hopefully the voices that we're presenting will come in this together. Next slide, please. The Mitochondria Innovation Initiative is a strategic initiative of the University of Toronto. Our vision is to innovate in mitochondria medicine and research through global community building. And that's one of the missions, and that's what we are doing here today, hopefully bringing this community together. Our ambition is simple, is to transform mitochondrial health, to transform the understanding of mitochondrial health and the disease, leading to better diagnosis and treatments to enhance the quality of life, of human life. It's such an important ambition, and it's big and it's broad, but we have the team to make this possible. Next slide. Our community is very broad. We bring together patients, patient advocacy groups, researchers, clinicians, trainees, fellows, foundations, NGOs, industry. Anyone that like to join this fight, it's welcome to come. We have around 300 members, representing around 150 researchers and clinicians, around 80 trainees, and 60 patients. Most of our members comes from the University of Toronto community, but also representing the external members from the international community. And we hope to bring and grow this community every day more. Next slide. Our researchers, clinicians, partner, patient advocates work all together in a very simple mission, a disease agnostic network to bring supporting technologies, integrative platforms, and enable collaboration. Working together, this will generate novel targets, discovering new diagnostics, and developing new therapeutic treatments, and hopefully disrupt innovation in a field that is much needed. I give you a simple example. Why a disease agnostic approach? It is actually enabling the conversation across different areas of disease. When we are building Mito2I, I met a professor in the University of Health Network, Marcelo Cipel, who works in lung transplant. And he was interested in understanding what is Mito2I doing with mitochondria, because in his mind, mitochondria was probably important for lungs. And we start talking, and in this simple conversation that started with a coffee, when the times were good and we could sit in person and have a coffee. And he said to me, well, one of the main problems with the lung is that it is not, there is a lot of rejections on lung transplant, and we don't get the lung to start working back again too fast. And we start talking, I asked him, how do you preserve the lungs? And he said, well, it's 4 degrees. I said, well, have we thought about maybe increasing a little bit the temperature to boost the mitochondrial energy metabolism? And so we did, and we are in clinical trials now, and improving to be a much better way to do lung transplant. There is less rejection and more availability of lungs, because we can preserve the lungs for 72 hours. Why this is important for rare disease? So that actually led to get over $1 million of funding that now is being used in understanding better mitochondrial transplant. As you all know, mitochondrial transplant is one of the technologies that we want to bring to the mitochondrial disease community. So the conversation, because it's a disease agnostic approach, can bring several voices together and have the funding and the finance and bringing the shining the light on mitochondria to make us, to enable discovery of new diagnostics, new therapeutic tools that will actually really influence the life of everyone here interested in mitochondrial disease. Next slide, please. Our initiative brings together several different opportunities, and I'm not going to go through all of them today. I just put it here. Please join our website, and if you feel like that this is a story that is enabling you, join our community. There is a little button in the website, right hand corner, say log in, click, become a member. You will receive every month on our newsletters what are the opportunities there. We have several workshops, we have several training opportunities for your trainings, we have funding opportunities that are going on, and hopefully bring together this Mitochondria Health Collective. We need to work together. It's not a Mito2I initiative. It's not a Glasgow University initiative. It's all coming together to a single voice where we can actually understand how can we do this work? How can we really transform? And I hope this is just the first of a webinar of a series of enabling this conversation. Next slide, please. I finalized my talk today to you just to say that Mito2I delivers a collaborative hub. And we are proud of that. We really want to work with each of you. Pedro, I hope we work more together with the Biochemical Society. Costas and Michael, I hope we will develop a very strong community with you and with all the mitochondrial disease foundations around the world. Visit our website and stay tuned. Next slide, please. Our Mito conference is coming up in partnership with the University of Ottawa and Mito Canada Foundation on November 26-21. Put it in your calendars. The links are coming soon for registration. Thank you very much for listening.
But yes, thank you, Costas. Thank you, Anna. And hello, everyone. A pleasure to be here today. I am Dr. Michael Pierre Johnson, and I am a Design Innovation Research Fellow with a particular interest in how to bring together effective multidisciplinary collaborations to address complex societal challenges. I'm also here representing my colleague and collaborator, Elio Cacavalli, who is a reader in transdisciplinary design innovation, who I've been working with on the crossover project, and who everyone here has met and knows he's a really important part of this work as well. So I just want to emphasize that for Elio. So in this presentation, I'll be sharing our work on the crossover project, which has been delivering workshops exploring new ways for biochemical sciences and society to come together and collaborate, with a particular focus today on our collaboration with Professor Kostas Tokatlides on opening up mitochondria research and potential directions for it. So why am I here in this awareness raising event about mitochondria? Firstly, it's worth reflecting on a history of science communication and how public knowledge and understanding of science has developed over the years and centuries, from the movements for scientific literacy in the 19th century and development of science journalism in the 1930s, where reporting on scientific developments would start to reach wider publics and influence popular culture, to the postmodern turn in the 80s through to the 2000s, where there was a rise in public critique of science and technology in the direction it was heading. And so more inclusive public engagement approaches have been sought and developed. And this had led to examples of more upstream engagement, where publics and wider disciplines can not only build understanding of scientific knowledge and development, but engage more in the directions it sets and the future worlds it seeks to make. And in this linear progression of science and society narratives, C.P. Snow is a British scientist and novelist who delivered an influential Reed lecture in 1959, where he stated that science and the humanities, representing the intellectual life of the whole of Western society, had become split into two cultures, and that this division was a major handicap to both in addressing the world's challenges. So our work on the crossover project tries to position design research as a mediating force between key areas of discipline, offering processes, practices, and new forms of inquiry that can enable more effective and impactful collaborations. And, oops, just bring it back one slide. There we go. So what we feel we bring as a design inquiry is the assemblage of tacit knowledge, that is knowledge based on personal experience of a situation or context that you do not acquire from being taught or from books. And that knowledge being given tangible form, conceptual and sensory information used to make sense of or represent something, particularly useful in complex contexts. So we do this through ethnographic research, physical prototypes, simulations, visual maps, diagrams, videos, photographs, and workshops to embody ideas and knowledge and to stimulate people to explore and form new ideas. To give an example of that from my past work in health and care, was how we researched and developed a model to represent people's experiences of living with diabetes. This developed from an analogy of flying a hot air balloon, where your only steerage was raising or lowering your insulin levels, like the heat you put into a hot air balloon. Life in the basket always prioritized work or responsibilities over managing your condition, and the external environment could bring clues from other balloons in how they flew, as in peers with the same experience, or indeed it can bring stormy weather, making management difficult. And we use this balloon model as a framework to inform development of new digital solutions, supporting diabetes self-management between clinicians, people living with diabetes, and wider experts. So one of the aims of our crossover work is to develop and evidence forms of effective collaboration, starting with multidisciplinarity, which involves disciplines coming together, but broadly sticking to their main area of knowledge. Then moving into interdisciplinarity, which involves occupying spaces between disciplines to produce outputs and outcomes that combine areas of knowledge, and through to our particular goal, to transdisciplinarity, which can transcend those disciplinary boundaries and silos and reconstruct them in new and preferable combinations to address challenges. So the journey we've been on with crossover started with a small one-off workshop where Elio and I were given a small pot of money from the Biochemical Society to bring biochemists together with designers and artists to openly share our disciplinary interest and explore what potential forms of collaboration could look like. And it was here we met Kostas and collaborated with him to deliver last year's Mitochondria and Us webinar, which Kostas very excellently sort of gave the detail of and the combinations and thoughts that built from that. From this, we formed a partnership to deliver one of the crossover workshops with a focus this time on mitochondrial disease. We brought together biochemical researchers in mitochondrial disease, together with creative practitioners in design and storytelling, experts in science communication, bioethics, medical sociology, and mitochondrial disease patient groups. And in the workshops, they shared their disciplinary interests, and then the workshop tasked them to form mixed groups to discuss and identify shared questions or stories they could explore and tell together, essentially. And these were framed at different levels that could foreground the different disciplines and the role they could play in this wider context. So here we frame them under the personal stories of living with mitochondrial disease, down to the cellular stories of what are the effects of mitochondrial dysfunction in the cells, all the way up to the societal stories, what are the ethical, cultural, and policy implications of mitochondrial research and disease. And we brought the patient voice in there by interviewing Christine Beale, who's here on the panel, to really represent what are the concerns at that experiential level. And so we used this on Miro. This was during a pandemic, but we were still able to connect and collaborate and have these shared discussions to produce these outputs and insights. So essentially, our workshop report, which will be happy for anyone who wishes to access it to share, documents key quotes, insights, and emerging questions from these group discussions across these levels, such as at this level of societal story, how do we develop visual tools for the diversity of people affected by mitochondrial disease? This was an issue addressing the different languages and cultures and the idea of rare disease needing to be addressed globally. And these were seen as questions that needed collaboration in order to fully address. So what did we learn? Alongside a range of such questions presented here demanding interdisciplinarity, we set out 4 areas for future development. Firstly, to challenge the current disease-siloed approach, as Costas iterated, to research towards a more mitochondria-centric one, to build stronger connections between not just research, but researchers and patients for the co-production of knowledge in these areas, to support the patient journey from diagnosis as a multi-stakeholder journey, so not just for the individual patient, but for their whole support network, and to develop a culture of what Rabinov called biosociality, where communities of practice can form around positive self-identity with mitochondrial disease. That's people living with the conditions and working towards the research, therapies, awareness, and ultimately care. And this is why we're here today, to propose to everyone here to join and engage with this global multidisciplinary network we are calling the Mitochondria Collective. And on the right here, building on those sort of directions we set, we have key objectives. Ultimately and implicitly, to develop a global multidisciplinary network for mitochondrial discovery research, innovation, and public awareness. Initially then, to coordinate a series of pilot collaborations to demonstrate interdisciplinary working, and then to align members' aims, knowledge, and experience to really set a direction of where research is needed in this field. Then gradually we wish to develop best practices in how new knowledge on mitochondrial health can inform not just new therapies, but awareness and understanding. And ultimately, we'll look to nurture this network through transdisciplinary collaboration and develop a next generation of mitochondrial scientists and partners able to form these collaborations in really impactful ways. And through the dialogues with Mito2I in Canada, we see real value and potential in what such a collective could do for mitochondrial research, open to all disciplines and voices who are able to contribute and set an example for the future of science and society collaborations. So thank you very much for listening. And I'll now hand over to Sonia from Mito2I to say a little more.
Thank you, Michael, for that wonderful background and introduction to the Mitochondria Collective and the steps that were taken over the crossover project to get to where we are today. Again, hi everyone, my name is Sonia Bridgebassi and I'm an Associate Director of Strategy and Partnerships at the Mito2I, the Mitochondrial Innovation Initiative at the University of Toronto. And I think very much, what we're looking at doing today and building this Mitochondrial Collective really aligns with what the mission and the vision is for Mito2I. At Mito2I, we've built a network of a number of scientists, clinicians, patient advocates, patient groups, organizations that all have a common goal to transform mitochondrial health and disease. And we've done that at the University of Toronto, and we've done that at a national level where we brought in universities and organizations across Canada, and now we've extended it globally. And I think that's where we're going to see the most impact when we all work together. This is not, as Anna mentioned earlier, this is not an initiative for one organization or one group. It's all of us working together collectively to get the word out that mitochondria matters to all, that mitochondria makes a difference in many diseases. And to understand mitochondrial disease, we need to understand mitochondria at its core function and many other diseases. And it's areas of where we can work together and build interdisciplinary collaborations. We can help spread awareness and communication to many other groups, and to really reach many audiences, and to get the interest of industry and organizations that can help support work in this field. So at Mito2I, we've been trying to do that for the last few years, is bring in partners that do have an interest in learning more about mitochondria and mitochondrial health, and developing therapeutics and technologies and therapies that are really going to help patients, because that's what we're here to do, is to really bring these new treatments to patients and improve their quality of life. So we have already developed partnerships in Canada with Mito Canada to really build out that patient foundation, where we bring in patients to engage in the research, to be part of research projects, to speak with our researchers, to connect researchers and clinicians. We built partnerships with the Lilly Foundation to really support and fund interdisciplinary research. And we built partnerships with My Mito Mission to create more awareness and to build out the communications on why mitochondria matters, and where mitochondrial dysfunction also plays a role in disease. So today we are delighted to have these partners here with us today to discuss how we can work together to create this Mitochondria Collective and promote this global network of multidisciplinary collaborations, innovation, public communication, and awareness. Remember, to establish this, no one group can do this alone, so we must combine efforts, resources, and expertise to really initiate on this collective. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce and invite the panelists to join me on the screen. Today we have Dr. Emil Kara, the president of the Mitochondrial Medicine Society, Dr. Philip Yeski, the scientific and alliance officer at the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation, Christine Beal, the co-founder and chair of My Mito Mission, and Alison McGuire, the head of research and finance at the Lilly Foundation, and Kate Marie, the CEO and president of Mito Canada Foundation. And just a reminder to everyone to please, in the audience, if you do have any questions for this panel or our previous speakers, please enter that into the chat, and we will regroup at the end of this session with all the speakers to go through those questions with us together as a group. To start off this session, I would like to just welcome again our panelists and ask the question on how each one of them think, patient focus groups, organizations, foundations can really be involved in making this Global Mitochondria Collective a success.
Really happy to kind of kick off with the first comments, if you like.
Sure, we'd love that.
Yeah, so again, thank you to the organizers for the invitation to be a part of this. It's a really interesting initiative, and I think it's perfectly consistent with some of the biggest opportunities and barriers that our organization, the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation, has identified as well, that we won't advance these large, complex undertakings absent really robust collaboration. So we have to find ways to bring patients, patient advocacy groups, and all the other stakeholders that have been mentioned in the previous presentations, academic researchers, industry, to bear and provide tools that facilitate that communication. So I think from my perspective, the importance of collaboration cannot be really overstated. Again, focusing on the patient advocacy side and what our organization tries to advance. We're really thrilled to be a part of a number of international collaborative projects, such as the International Mito Patient Group, which is a federation of mito groups from around the world. We look for opportunities to promote awareness of mitochondrial disease across borders. We look for opportunities to advance initiatives that otherwise one single member could not do as effectively. And maybe I'll let my fellow panelist, Allison, speak a little bit more. Her and I are both directors of IMP, and perhaps Allison, you could mention the Global Registry Project. Yeah, we also are involved in a roadmap project for Lee syndrome, the most common form of mitochondrial disease, where again, we're bringing a number of patient advocacy groups together to try to, from a patient-centric perspective, advance better diagnosis, development of treatments and cures, optimizing clinical care for Lee syndrome patients within the mitochondrial disease community. This is co-funding of grants. This is coordination of important initiatives like natural history data collection. And I think if we're being honest, we're learning as we go too. We don't have it all figured out, but the important thing is we're talking. There's an open, transparent dialogue that takes place. It's a collaboration built on respect and professionalism, and not necessarily advancing any one organization's priority, but thinking what's for the greater good, what can we do? And I think these approaches are very consistent with what we've been discussing today so far inside this Mito Collective. Again, we're very focused on the rare inherited disorders, but clearly mitochondrial function dysfunction is critical to the human health condition at a higher level. And so the opportunity to attach to that, I think, is a growth opportunity for our disease community. Maybe I'll pause there and allow some of the other panelists to share their thoughts.
Thanks, Phil. Allison, did you want to maybe pick up on a little bit on the disease registry that Phil was talking about and how you can see that fitting a little bit with the Mito Collective? Allison's trying to figure it out. Is anybody else able to? Oh, okay.
Yeah, let's see if we can get Allison or not. I can circle back later and talk a little bit about that project if you want, Sonia.
Okay, if you don't mind, maybe we'll go there and see if we can get some of the technical difficulties worked out. Okay. So, and Phil, you mentioned, working with a bunch of mito groups around the world. I know obviously most of them are here, or some of them are here today. And so what has been your experience sort of trying to organize, larger collaborative projects or, more interdisciplinary approaches with these groups?
Sure. Well, it begins with a shared passion for making a difference for the patient community that we represent. Mitochondrial disease is worldwide, and when everybody's coming to the table with that starting point of let's make a difference, and not just I think, as others have said about patient advocacy, pat the patients on the head or give them a pillow to lay their head upon. Support is very important, but we can make a difference. And so I think our partners and the groups we've interacted with that have that shared philosophy of wanting to make a difference from a patient perspective. It's not without challenges of course, distance and time, of coordinating, across long distances. And I think, as we've learned along the way, there are cultural differences. There may be different priorities within any specific region. And I think any effective collaborative has to acknowledge that and make room for that, that it's not going to be homogenous necessarily, that everybody's going to see things proceeding the same way. But what I mentioned before, right? When you have a foundation of respect and a shared mission and passion, you know, I found that these things can be addressed and that you can make progress. Important to take it in discrete steps and maybe not try to do too much too quickly, at least for organizations like ours. Everyone has limited resources, so we have to acknowledge that and make sure that we're not overreaching with our goals.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned some of these challenges. So what challenges do you see the International Mitochondrial Collective being able to address, you know, as we come together as a whole community? What can we sort of try to build upon and to get past some of those challenges that we've seen?
Are you asking me, Sonia? I'm happy to.
I think so, because I think everybody else is
oh no.
right now. So it's a one-on-one interview right now.
Well, that's really unfortunate because we have some really important perspectives from the other panelists. So try to get unmuted, everybody. You know, I think, you know, what's important is, you know, you need tools, right? And so having a platform to bring people together, or to at least coordinate a series of meetings that can be both virtual and in person when we get back to doing those sorts of things. You know, that's really important, you know, to at least have a straw, so to speak, that's stirring the drink. And so, you know, I think that's where a collective is a really interesting concept of just trying to keep the whole project moving in a direction and providing tools to bring the important stakeholders together for those discussions. But that's at least one aspect.
Okay, and I think we do have Allison and Christine on the line. Is that right? Hi.
Can you hear me? I think so.
Yeah, we can hear you. Oh, everybody's back. Great. So maybe I'll go back to the first question.
Thanks, Phil.
I'm quiet.
I'm in here going, yeah, what he said. That's amazing. Heavy lifting.
I mean, as you can probably pick up, like as patient organisations around the world, there are no barriers between us. We all have a common goal, and that's to try and find effective treatments and cures for the patients that we support in our own countries, and that actually makes it really easy to work together as patient organisations, because we all want the same thing, and we can all learn from each other despite being in different parts around the world. I mean, each organisation is at different stages of their evolution, and actually we all have different resource as well, and we learn so much from each other, that knowing how beneficial it is for us as patient organisations to be in close communication with each other just gives me real hope that actually these kinds of collaborations can extend into the scientific community as well. And I mean, as patients, the patients that we know mito's complex, but there can be a sense of frustration sometimes within our patient communities that researchers are just not doing enough, because we don't have effective treatments and we don't have a cure, and it's hard as patients to get your head around how in 2021 that there are still diseases like mito that we just don't understand. So these kinds of initiatives that bring together scientists and clinicians and other disciplines that support communication between stakeholders that have all got such a passion for mitochondrial health is so important, because it enables communication between, from us to you, what patients want, what research do patients want, but equally we need to know what research is being done so we can communicate it back. So all of these kind of relationships are so important if we're gonna move forward with mitochondrial health.
Yeah, absolutely agree with Allison. And I think, you know, the collective certainly has an opportunity here to build a larger interconnected community based on the uncommon that we have in common. And I think that's where it will translate into more of the agnostic state, is what we're learning here in our primary mitochondrial disease dysfunction space is, what benefits do we learn from this space that we can apply? And as well as what we have established in relying on each other as communities is we have an opportunity as a collective is to build greater equity for those who we may not know today are affected by mitochondrial dysfunctioning, but through research discover that mitochondrial dysfunction is at play, and being a strong community where we are able to provide a level of support that they're going to need based on where we've come from. So completely agree with Allison. Great points.
Thanks, Allison. Thanks, Kate. Amal, you want to add to that?
Sure. So I come to this from a different perspective. I'm not part of an advocacy group. I'm a physician, and I represent the physicians and clinicians who take care of primary mitochondrial disease. And I am very happy that an initiative like this has been created. Because we have seen in our clinics and in our practices the flood and influx of patients who have mitochondrial dysfunction from different diseases, and we see how medicine and science is changing and is including mitochondria in every aspect of human disease. And so I feel as a clinician that it's an urgent need to have a collaborative that focuses on dysfunction. Of course, in my field, and I'm focused on primary mitochondrial disease, we also have similar struggles. We are trying to organize, we're trying to collaborate. We have with the help of the UMDF and other advocacy group, we have identified some gaps, and we have created other collaborative. One of them is called Treat Mito, which is a collaborative to bring all the clinical and research and clinical trial efforts that we are pursuing in the primary mitochondrial disorder field into a collective like this one. But the overarching objective is really to better understand the mitochondrial dysfunction in many different diseases, because primary mitochondrial disorders are a smaller group within the larger group of all human disorders. So the financial incentive to study those dysfunction is probably higher than what is available for the primary mitochondrial disease, and whatever benefits the bigger umbrella of dysfunction is going to benefit the smaller groups that have a more genetic basis of their disease. So I think this is very important and very timely, and I think that physicians and researchers and clinicians who are doing research in primary mitochondrial disease or dysfunction are really in need for something like this, where they can easily and readily find collaborators and understand what other research is being done. One of the very frustrating things that I find in academia and when we do research is to try to figure out who has anyone else thought about this? Has anyone been working on this? Is there someone that has a technology or samples that I could use for my research? And having something like this that brings all these parties together is definitely going to enhance that experience and expedite the research and hopefully get us there, like Allison said, to that cure and to that treatment.
Yeah. And you make a good point there. And then Philip, you mentioned this the last time we spoke, is that, learning a little bit more about mitochondria and other disease will shine the light on primary mitochondrial diseases. So Philip, I don't know if you want to discuss that a little bit more from your perspective.
I mean, there are estimates of 7,000 plus various rare diseases. That number maybe even be thousands higher at this point. They're all terrible diseases. Unfortunately, many of those rare diseases, finding treatments are sort of one-off solutions, right? It may be a single gene and fixing that single gene. Mitochondrial disease, on the one hand, is very challenging because it's so complex and heterogeneous. On the other hand, the fact that mitochondrial function, if we can improve it within these rare inherited disorders, that opportunity to progress those advancements out to much larger populations of patients, right, it is a significant one. So if we raise awareness on these larger populations and even a small trickle of the additional capital and fundraising and resources that come from these larger, more well-known common diseases, trickles down to mitochondrial disease, that's a win for our group. So I really think it's a win. It's set up to be a true win-win. Our patients may well represent the most important cohort of patients to advance our understanding of mitochondrial function, because no matter how well they may eat or exercise, all the things we talk about that make healthy mitochondria, they have genetic abnormalities that prevent that. So figuring out how to solve these problems, I really believe will have a huge impact on society at whole.
And Christine, do you want to maybe add to that a little bit? I know that's a very dear to my Mito mission.
Very much so. I've got to say, it blew my mind when, as a layperson, I heard for the first time that mitochondrial dysfunction is the key to so many illnesses. I could not believe that I did not already know that. I could not believe that wasn't common knowledge, that we weren't all already shouting it from the rooftops. So my excitement with this project isn't just the scientists and the clinicians learning more. It's very much about the general public learning more and ways that we can more effectively do that. And I think the reason, if anybody's not sure, why is it important that the general public know is because mito patients move in medical circles for treatment. They depend on science for progress and for answers and for treatments and cures. But the day-to-day lives are spent amongst the families and friends and communities, i.e. the general public. And they have an illness that can be as devastating as cancer, and yet often very little or no understanding from the people out there that they meet day to day. And that's something that I would dearly love to change, and that's very much at the heart of what we try to do. And because there's a lot of isolation that comes from that, and it can only be improved through better awareness in the general public. And when we get the message to the general public about how widespread that potential for change is, and this isn't just about rare illnesses, this is about common illnesses and millions of people benefiting. That's really exciting stuff. And I just think we should be sharing it more, and I hope we can come up with ways to do that. And I think as a collective, we absolutely have the power to do it. I think sometimes when we speak individually, we're not just as powerful. If I speak as a patient advocate, people perceive that I've got an emotional investment in it. My daughter died from it when she was 28, 4 years ago. So people perceive we have an emotional investment, and it loses our credibility to a point. I think when scientists speak, people might perceive that they've got, they're out for the funding. When the medical people speak, people perceive that they're only talking about a few people and it doesn't relate to them. But when we speak with one voice, a lot of those melt away, and it becomes so much stronger. There's a phrase for it, isn't there, that's just evading me at the moment. I've got it written down. Oh, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that's absolutely what we can offer as a collaboration.
Well said.
Yep, agree.
Thank you for that, Christine. And Kate, do you want to maybe add something from sort of the patient groups? And I like, Christine, how you mentioned credibility and having everybody sort of their voices together and just making that more of an impact. Like what can we?
Yeah, everybody's story is so different, isn't it? And I think we tend to get labeled as complex, and it is complex, but at the same time, so is cancer. But we talk about just cancer, don't we?
Yeah.
And people get it. And I think there's a real danger in just emphasizing the rarity all the time. To me, it's the commonality. It's the fact that together, actually, we're a massive cohort, and we're such, as Phil, I think, said, such a vital cohort because we're the key. That we have this USP, if you want to put it in marketing terms. Why should I support mitochondrial disease? Why shouldn't I just as easily support motor neuron or diabetes or stroke? Well, because all those involve mitochondrial damage, and by supporting mitochondrial research, you're actually covering so many people and so many illnesses.
Amazing.
I think we need to win hearts and minds, public hearts and minds, because that's where the funding comes ultimately.
Well, and that's how policy changes too, right? You have the current swell of support from our patient associations. We're the voice of the communities. That's when governments listen, when you've got a community that wants change. Yeah.
I worked in an MP's office for 8 years before Emma died, and I'm very much aware that it's about public opinion, you know.
Absolutely.
In the UK, the free prescription eligibility hasn't been revisited for 50 years, apart from to stick cancer on it in 2009.
Oh my goodness.
Quite appropriately, obviously. Now, you know, until we become a strong voice, those sort of things don't change, do they? Because it's about, if the government thinks that enough people there's going to be an outcry, if things don't change, then that's when things will change. So
yeah,
we need to shout.
Absolutely. The stronger the voice, the better. And again, I think when it comes to protecting mitochondrial health, we're all patients. Some of us need to take prescriptive action, right, to protect our health, and then those who are impacted by mitochondrial dysfunction have to take prescriptive action to treat and improve their symptoms. But in the end, we are all end users here because energy equals life.
Yeah, really true, Kate. There's 7 billion plus people on the face of the earth that should care about their health. And that really speaks to the scale of the opportunity. And just thinking about the hearts and minds, and you know, really convincing society as a whole to put pressure on government to, you know, government plays such an important role in funding research, right? Whether it's here in the States in the NIH, or you know, other large funding agencies in other parts of the world. You know, most of those are still, I would say, in a medical research structure that is focused on anatomy, or eyes, livers, you know, hearts, and doing research around organs. And now you have mitochondria cutting horizontally, right, across all of those. And so it really does require a complete rethinking of how we advance major research initiatives, not just amongst the patient groups, but at a governmental level too. And that's a big undertaking.
This is turning out to be a really exciting and engaging conversation, and we want to keep it going. So I think this is a good time to invite back Pedro and our speakers from earlier, Kostas, Michael, and Anna, to broaden the conversation. So Pedro, I'll hand it over to you, just in case there were any questions that came through from the audience.
There have been. First of all, I mean, the first couple of questions are for Anna, and a couple of things that were mentioned at the beginning about the Mitochondria conference in November 26 this year, and about whether it would be physical or visual. Oh, sorry, if it would be physical or virtual, and about registration details where people could find a bit more about that.
Thank you, Pedro. And unfortunately, it will be a virtual conference this year as we to continue fighting COVID-19 pandemic. But we hope to be back in person for the following year. So more details are coming alive in our website, www.mito2i.ca, and also in Mito Canada's website, because it's our partner on this conference. We have not yet fully finalized the agenda, but as soon as we have that, it will be all available for us via our both websites and Instagram and the Twitter.
And the follow-up question actually can be for you, and or anyone else who has the expertise to go a bit more into it. But it was on mitochondrial transplants, and there were a couple of people who were very curious about how far along they have come in terms of becoming a viable treatment or not for those suffering from mitochondrial disease.
Yeah, I can start on the discussion on that. So it's a very dear topic to me. I think this became very interesting topic with Professor James McCauley in Boston when they tried and succeeded doing mitochondrial transplant in patients with heart failure, pediatric patients. We brought him to our conference at the Mito 2019, and it was a very interesting conversation. However, there is a lot of still gaps, technology is speaking, to really clarify questions that I don't want to bore everyone with the details. But for example, how pure is the mitochondrial extraction? Are we actually carrying mitochondrial DNA that has been released out of the mitochondria to that transplant? Why that should be important? Because if you have mitochondrial DNA that is out of the mitochondria, it induces inflammation. So we don't want that. So how pure that can be? Can this be applied in a condition where we have a mitochondrial disease, where you have a heteroplasmic mutation and we need to do autologous? Autologous mean taking the mitochondria from yourself and putting back in yourself. So can we actually select the mitochondria that doesn't have the mutation and reimplant those to decrease heteroplasm? So those are all questions, Pedro, that is still yet to be understood in the community. But this is an example of where we joined voices and we were open-minded on different fields of science to learn from each other. The patient community was asking more. We want a new treatment. We want to have this mitochondrial transplant. So we heard about it. So we brought James McCauley, which is from the heart disease, to talk about this. And then the project that I spoke earlier about the lung transplant ended up actually leading us to get funding to further enable mitochondrial transplantation. So if you understand what I'm trying to say, is that when we start bringing all the voices and pieces together, like Christine and Kate were saying, it just amplified the voices and amplified the funding, as Philip was saying. It's so hard to get funding for mitochondria. But once we actually spread this and bring different disciplines together, we fight that anatomical way of doing research. It's the lung, it's the heart, it's the brain. So we needed to actually figure out ways of actually going around and bringing more. I often say, let's do to mitochondria what we did for heart 50 years ago, when we became actually working and having cholesterol and lipids to be screened every day. So why we don't do that for mitochondria as well? Can we get there? Costas, do you think we are there? We can get to the technology there?
No, I don't think we're there. I mean, there are always problems in mitochondria, tissue specificities, you know, delivery to specific tissues and things like that. So the technology is not mature by no means. But you know, working in fundamental aspects. So, for example, you mentioned one problem, which is maybe a technical one. How pure are the mitochondria? Well, we can think about ways to purify mitochondria, purify them to the level where they are going to be in a state that can be really used for transplantation. Of course, then one needs to be aware of the you know, specificities of the different tissues. But actually bringing all these together is going to make a sustainable, I think, progress in the field.
And this is complete serendipity. We didn't plan this at all, but as it turns out, UMDF is hosting a bench to bedside seminar at the top of the hour, less than an hour away, at 11 a.m. James McCauley and Alexander Rabchevsky both talking about mitochondrial transplantation. So if anyone in the audience is interested in hearing about these leaders in this field and what they're working on, just Google UMDF bench to bedside, and it's a free online seminar, less than an hour away. We can find out more about the state of mitochondrial transplantation.
Oh, fantastic. I'm glad that we are talking about it.
And we had a few questions that I will coalesce into a single mega question, Kostas, which was on this issue of a talk between two genomes and how. So these were questions from a few biology students that we have, biochemistry students watching the talk, and how much this issue of you having a nuclear genome and a mitochondrial genome might be interplaying with mitochondrial disease, and if it is an issue at all.
Of course, yeah. This is one of the complexities of fundamental mitochondrial research. We need to understand the interplay of the two genomes and the coordination of the two genomes. And one of the problems of the scientific community has been traditionally, you know, the sort of anatomical approach of, you know, siloed approach also holds true for the scientific community. So people working on, you know, nuclear, you know, mitochondrial genes or mitochondrial DNA expressed genes didn't really talk to each other. But actually what happens in mitochondria is the sort of, collaboration of these two genomes. So regulation, under what conditions can you regulate, the nuclear genome in response to mitochondrial dysfunction, for example, or damage, so that you don't have all these 1,000 or so proteins coming into the mitochondria all the time, or maybe increase that in some situations. So that's a very, very complex topic, and we need to understand the coordination of these two genomes. And also an additional complexity is that what we know about nuclear gene expression doesn't really hold true for mitochondrial gene expression, which is a whole field on its own. And we don't really have the tools to actually modify mitochondrial DNA genome yet. We're getting there, and it's a very intense field of research to do genome engineering at the mitochondrial DNA level. And that is also something that we need for the future, clearly.
I have a message here from Elio, which is actually a very good prompt for the conversation in terms of how this initiative can change the discourse around mitochondria, which I felt personally was very, very, very powerful. And Elio said that the Mitochondria Collective looks at mitochondrial disease in a relational way by bringing together the lived experiences of those affected and those involved with a broad range of expertise around this field. And that he hopes that the Mitochondria Collective provides an opportunity to facilitate richer interactions and communication between the scientific community, physician communities, patients, families, patient groups, and most importantly, the general public, which I was very struck by when you said, Christine, as well, this whole issue of what the public perception around mitochondria is and the involvement of mitochondria in so many pathologies and so many basic biological mechanisms. I don't know if you want to comment a bit on this, but it is a very, very powerful message, how ubiquitous it is. If anyone wants to...
I say, well, I was quite interested when we did our first workshop that quite several of the researchers on the workshop had never met a patient working on mitochondrial research, had never met a patient with mitochondrial disease. And it was hugely surprising to me, really, that hadn't happened. But actually thinking about it and understanding from their perspective, there was just no opportunity to. There wasn't any kind of connection or collaboration with patients or patient organisations to facilitate that. And I have to say, at Lilly, we tried something a few years back when we started funding medical research, that we actually insisted that any of our Lilly-funded researchers came to one of our family weekends and took part in it in some way. So not to present their research, but actually to help in kids club, or to help set up the dinner table, or to be part of the fun day outside, and actually just because we wanted them to try and understand all of this. Their whole life's work is around trying to find better treatments or cure for this patient group, that they didn't understand the disease. They read it in a textbook, but actually they didn't really understand the impact of this condition. And we had such incredible feedback, and we can't stop them coming now. They just want to help everywhere they can because they're so bought into it, and they've said that how it makes, actually they've changed the way that they look at their research now. It has given them a new drive to want to change things because they now know the impact of it. So that was an interesting start, and I think we can build on that through this collaboration.
Hi, I would like to add to that. I think it's very important to raise public awareness about the difference between mitochondrial dysfunction and primary mitochondrial disease, not only because it focuses the research, but from the practical perspective. A lot of patients who have a dysfunction are flocking towards the primary mitochondrial experts in the clinics, and there aren't too many of those. There are a handful of those, and they are overburdened. And so raising public awareness is going to help change policies so that every cardiologist will have to become a mitochondrial dysfunction expert, every pulmonologist, every GI doctor, so that when these patients have a specific dysfunction in a specific organ, won't have to wait 2 years to get an appointment in a mitochondrial clinic, but they can go to any of their subspecialists and get the care that they need. And with all the interest in treating mitochondrial dysfunction, I hope that in the next 5 to 10 years, we will have a lot of FDA approved drugs that will at least treat dysfunction, and it cannot be incumbent on just the mitochondrial disease experts to be prescribers of these medications. So every specialist in medicine, every medical student that enters any clinical path will need to know about mitochondrial dysfunction and will need to understand how it's treated, what it does, and apply the knowledge by organ-specific specialty that they take.
And following up actually quite nicely, if you are a patient or a family member of a patient, how can you get involved in terms of local networks? Obviously, this will vary a lot with geography, but if you could speak a bit about, in your cases, what local networks worked or do you know have been influential in how people can then get involved?
Sonia, okay. Sonia, do you want to start maybe with our patient engagement workshops at Mito2i?
Sure. So Mito2i very much from the beginning has tried to engage patients and have them involved in the research. As Alison mentioned, there's some cases where researchers working in these areas haven't even, met a patient or been face to face with a patient with mitochondrial disease. So right from the beginning, we knew that it was important to integrate within our programs, our research. With Mito Canada, we have been able to do that and build our patient community. But also we work with Erin Walker at UCL Partners in the UK. And she really does head our patient engagement and sort of we've done workshops and seminars for our research community to educate them and to make them aware of how to integrate patient engagement within their research study, the design, the outputs, the results, and sort of how to disseminate that information. So all the way from very beginning of thinking about your project to the end, and really we for our own grants, when we do our innovation grants, our scholarships, our fellowships, we actually have that as a component within our grants to make sure that the thinking is there, the engagement is there, and even for students on smaller research projects from master's to PhD are also thinking in a way, how is this going to eventually impact a patient's life, and how do we get this from the bench to the bedside, and just sort of get that way of thinking and integrate that within the research community. So we've been very successful so far, and something that we do want to still continue to build in. And I think through this Mitochondria Collective, this is another way that we can help with generating the new generation of scientists and trainees and getting them involved from a very early stage, so that they know that this is something of importance and that we should continue to build on this as we build out research, interdisciplinary research.
Yeah, if I may just add quickly, Costas, to what Sonia was saying. So if you are a patient or a patient advocate and you're listening to this and you like to help us in Mito2i to review grants or work with a scientist, please go to our website, just contact us and send us an email with your interest. Every grant, from a scholarship to an innovation grant, is reviewed by a patient partner. So we really need more patient engagement. So if you are interested, please join us on helping us to build this engagement with our patient community. Another part that I would like to ask, if you are listening and you'd like to share your story with us, we love to hear, because Christine, I think you're doing a very similar thing in creating posters where we voicing out everyone's how we see mitochondrial dysfunction and disease. So we have this working together with Christine and Mito2i, putting together patients' voices in format of posters and podcasts. So if you are interested, again, just go on our website, contact us, and let us know that of your interest. Thank you. Sorry, Costa, I think I interrupted.
One thing I wanted to add to this is that this may be a particular problem for people that don't live in a country where there is an established mitochondrial patients community and organization. And in that respect, I think what we're trying to achieve here with the Mito Collective, which is a more global sort of umbrella activity, would be incredibly useful, and probably working, in parallel with the International Mitopatient Organization, that is like an umbrella organization. I had an experience when I was still based in Greece, where someone, a family that had a child with mitochondrial disease, after many months of looking around and not being able to find any information, they contacted me because they found me on the web, and then I got them in touch with the Newcastle group that have a very specialized expertise on detecting, diagnosing mitochondrial disease, and then they took it from there. But actually, globally, if we can establish this sort of collective where people can find information and go to experts, that would be definitely a very worthwhile goal, I think.
And to add to that is we're very much in the early stages of building this collective. This is almost the first iteration of bringing these voices together. And so do watch this space on Mito2I in the conference in November, because there we're going to be starting to set some of the aims, some of the agenda, and we're very open. We're not saying we know all the answers. We want people to come along and share those stories. What I shared about the workshop was our device was storytelling. It's the one discipline that we all share, and we've seen some excellent storytellers at the conference today, but it's about that coherence of the story we're telling. And Christine gave a real sort of call and a voice of a collective voice, a collective story to tell. And this is one of the frontline ways that everyone can join at this early stage to sort of say, what are the stories worth sharing? What are the stories worth telling? And if you become better at telling compelling stories, you're more likely to get funded, you're more likely to be in the public interest. And this is the role that we're trying to bring, of having creative disciplines and wider sociological disciplines to support that process, because you've got evidence behind that as well as gather. So do watch this space. We will be promoting it, but it is an early part of the journey.
And Michael, I was going to exactly ask you to ask you a couple of questions, just mainly on the work you guys have been doing on the role of interdisciplinary design methodologies and how you can tell these stories, which I was super interested in when this whole thing started. And I wanted to give you the chance to speak a bit about that.
As in in a bit more detail. Well, sorry, Alison, I'm going to draw on you here, because it's also the perspectives different disciplines bring when they're introduced to some of the ideas and some of the experiences of patients with mitochondria. So one of the conversations that happened in the workshop was, how do you represent mitochondrial disease when the symptoms are so different across the population affected? And there was one of the biochemical scientists who says he uses this sort of tree analogy, that it all stems from the same root, but actually, so you're all part of the same sort of root cause, but it can manifest in different ways. And so that started to become a way of telling a story about mitochondrial disease that could then help people understand it better, and why the research into this shared root of mitochondrial dysfunction is so important. So that it was these different perspectives that were helping to roll out new ways of just expressing it, new ways of telling this story. And the more we do that together, the more impactful, the more effective, the more present this idea of mitochondrial research and the impacts of it are going to be in the public awareness and also policy.
We will be wrapping up in a few minutes, but I wanted to add, aside from giving anyone the chance to add anything else, if not, just ask a very general question on what do you think could help the most in mobilizing public discourse around mitochondria, given that it's not as present in public discourse as some other fields like cancer research or cancer in general, or any other pathology. Because I'm thinking about, like, people I know personally, it's not even in their language, not something that people think about, and it's so ubiquitous. If anyone wants to comment, I know it's a very big question, a very ambitious question. But...
I think it has to be an ongoing effort, on multi-level. As I said, public opinion, changing public opinion, trying to change policies so that mitochondrial dysfunction and mitochondrial disease are incorporated in curricula across countries. Also talking at scientific meetings, talking at society meetings, having these webinars now with virtual meetings. It's a lot easier to reach out, and I don't think these virtual meetings are going anywhere. People like them. They can get done very quickly. Posting, people use a lot of social media that can start a conversation. I just want to be careful, though, that we don't overemphasize mitochondrial dysfunction in human disease and care, just because everyone is going to start thinking that as long as you cure my mitochondrial dysfunction, I'm going to be fine. It's only a part of the bigger picture, and patients and families have to understand that so they don't get the wrong message and the wrong expectation.
Yeah. And I actually have one last question, which is from a young scientist perspective. So if you're starting out and you're an ECR, how you can get involved in research into mitochondria and mitochondrial dysfunction, which is again a very big question. But I mean, I guess check what research groups are closest to you. If anyone has any letters to young scientists or pointers.
Can I just start answering this? There have been lately and over the last year with all the pandemic, there have been a lot of conferences specifically targeted to ECRs working in mitochondria. And actually these online conferences have given the possibility specifically to ECR, to young researchers from almost everywhere in the world to actually talk to, maybe present their work or hear their colleagues present their work on mitochondrial dysfunction and disease and talk to some of the experts in the field. Normally in a scientific conference, you would have, maybe 100, 200, 300 people, and the participation of the young researchers is always limited by accessibility to funds to travel, their time constraints, etc. So if we can keep fora like this ongoing, I think that will be a major difference for such researchers. I know that for a fact from people in my group and others that, in my sort of research area, that has been very well received by ECR. So that's one way of getting involved. There are others, of course, but I think in terms of us PIs working on mitochondrial research, we also have we need to incorporate more of the mitochondrial research in the curriculum at the undergraduate level and also postgraduate level, because in the training of bioscientists, mitochondria are still viewed as separate. It's bioenergetics. It's just one part of metabolism, and that's it. And that's wrong, and it underpins so many aspects of cell physiology. So we need to improve training of these young researchers, because their interest in making a difference in human disease is there, but the awareness of the role that mitochondrial research can play in that is probably something we need to work on.
Cool. Unless anyone has anything else to add, I'll go for my final words of peace. Let me just go over to my document. So again, obviously, personally, it's been an amazingly interesting session for me. I'm sure it has been for everyone watching. So thank you for attending, and thank you for all the speakers. And we can continue the conversation online, obviously. You can tag us at BiochemSoc or PP Publishing on Twitter. We are always welcoming suggestions for future topics for and speakers, obviously, to feature in this Biochemistry Focus webinar series. If you have any ideas, we do invite you to submit a proposal for an upcoming webinar. And if you have missed any of the previous webinars, they will be on our YouTube channels as soon as we've checked the subtitles and those technicalities. They will be uploaded soon. And you can find out more about the webinars and proposed webinars on www.biochemistry.org/webinars. And obviously check the BiochemSoc website to check other ways that you can get involved. And otherwise, thank you to everyone, and have an amazing morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. Thank you so much.